Welcome to Emotional Sobriety.
It's so good to see you, man. You
Thanks.
have no idea. I was telling Allen yesterday how much I missed. Well, I think I texted you too. I missed you so much, man. How are you?
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, if you're
today?
gonna miss me, you should text me, not Allen. Come on.
No, I did. But how are you feeling today, man?
I'm feeling better. I'm just a chemo rookie. I didn't see it coming. They actually didn't give me I didn't have enough nausea meds on hand. Didn't know, they have a lot of that in the actual chemo nowadays, but
Not enough.
No, and so it hit me fast on Wednesday. Wednesday was chemo, and Friday hit me fast. Really, I thought I was just sailing along, all of a sudden it's just hit me fast. And yeah, I see you have the face that knows what I'm talking about. It's not fun.
Well, but see, I don't. I'm feeling terrible for you, but the 6 months of chemo that I had was a breeze compared to almost anybody I know, Thom, including you, that's gone through chemo and radiation. I didn't get sick at all. I didn't lose my hair. The steroids and the chemo did me a lot more harm than the chemo drugs. I got real hyper for a few days until we changed the steroid. So I didn't know you were having severe nausea. Man.
Yeah, I did this time, but I got my nausea medicine. I'm fired up and ready to go again.
I didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights when I first started chemo, Thom, and I didn't know it was the really powerful steroid.
We'll see what happens to me. I sleep like a fucking log anytime, anywhere, always have. So it's like, and I've been sleeping every chance I got since this. So that sleep is not a problem.
Welcoming Roger Andis back to the podcast. And now we've got Thom and also Allen here to talk about self-esteem and emotional sobriety. How's everyone doing today?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, you don't want to go there.
Well, I can tell you it's an audio podcast, but everybody on screen is smiling, so they must not be doing too bad.
We're
smiling at the absurdity of the idea that even feeling good could be a possibility right now.
There you go.
Nobody lives there all the time, but when you're fully in the moment, you can experience joy no matter what else is going on. That's what we were just doing. Because when Patrick said everybody was smiling, I looked up at everybody's smile and including mine, and realized we're all smiling.
The only other thing I would add to that, Thom, is if you're in the moment enough and if you're self-accepting enough, right? Because I can be in the moment with my shame and with my self-hatred and stuff, and I'm not smiling too much. But if I'm in the moment enough and I'm self-accepting enough, or I should just say reality accepting enough, which includes me but isn't limited to me, then I can. It's true. I can smile, and especially if I'm with people I love, like you guys, all three of you.
Well, that's a great segue into where I think we're going today, which is one of the things I've learned as we've looked at self-esteem, and recovery and emotional sobriety, how it all goes together and I've learned it as much from you, maybe more from you than anybody else, is how much self-esteem is associated and is dependent upon self-acceptance.
Yeah.
I mean, like radical self-acceptance moment to moment. Is that overstated?
No, it's not overstating it at all. As my mentor, as you guys know, in the area of self-esteem, and a guy I did quite a bit of my personal therapy with on myself, Nathaniel Branden, said, if you don't have a high level of self-acceptance, you don't have a high level of self-esteem. Even more so than the other pillars of self-esteem from his perspective. So our degree to which we are in both senses of self-acceptance. He writes about 3 levels of it, but I'll only speak to 2. The first one is the level where we've learned most of the time in most ways to be a good friend to ourselves, right? To be somebody who's trying to be encouraging rather than discouraging, caring rather than hateful toward who we are as a person. The other level he talks about it at is even if I'm not happy with a lot of parts of myself, I can still be accepting of them in the way of I can be willing to acknowledge them and face them and feel them, right?
Yes.
And work through them, which can take weeks, months, years. If it's a reality that's unacceptable enough to me, the death of a loved one, for instance, or the loss of a relationship, that can take months and years to achieve a deep level of acceptance of an experience like that. From my point of view.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about from that, and let me be sure I got it right, because part of what I see self-acceptance is a process more than an all or none thing with the way you describe it. And so when you talk about resistance to acceptance, the first thing when I hear you talking to somebody like on the Thursday group or just or even one of us is like, about that, where there's resistance to acceptance. I think if I'm getting this right, one of the first places you go is just to say, okay, well, we'll accept the resistance. As well, it's part of it. It's not like fighting it. It's like, just, okay, accept the next piece.
And I'm so pleased you brought that in, Thom, because self-acceptance, from my perspective, as it's evolved, and it's always applicable to our situation. There's no experience I can be having that the question of self-acceptance or the process or attitude of self-acceptance is not relevant to, is not applicable to, because like you said, if I'm in a place where I don't have the slightest bit of acceptance towards something that's going on in me or something that's going on in another person, especially one I care a lot about, or some situation or event, that's where the self-acceptance process begins, is I'm accepting right now that I hate this. I don't have an ounce of ability or willingness to accept this reality right now, like, especially with the health issues that, you, Thom, and Allen, and I hope you haven't been going through any, Patrick, that the three of us have been going through in recent weeks and recent months. That's very often where the process of self-acceptance needs to begin, Thom, is
and
I don't have it.
And we still get to, maybe I'm being too literal here, but so, because I'm thinking about myself now and also myself through the years in terms of different versions of myself trying to get a hold of this. So that means that still counts as self-acceptance.
It absolutely does, from my perspective. So, but I can
accepting
also,
that I don't want, I hate this, I don't want this, I can't stand this, I don't want to accept it. That's even self-acceptance.
It is very much so from my perspective, very much so. But here's the other thing I would add that's just coming to me as you say that, Thom. If I have some degree of differentiation from that, from the feeling I'm having or the event that happened or whatever, I can be experiencing that, but I can still be this is filled with paradox, filled with irony for me. So I can feel, one of Branden's statements, as you've heard me say several times regarding self-acceptance, and you've heard Allen cite Branden with this too, do not be in an adversarial relationship to your own experience.
Wow.
Now, he acknowledges when he's writing about self-acceptance in the 6 pillars of self-esteem, in the self-acceptance chapter, the self-acceptance pillar, sometimes the best we can do is acknowledge that we don't have any acceptance toward the experience we're having. So yes, that is a form.
But you're still you're still managing to have some differentiation with that, is what you're saying.
Go ahead.
Well, because this is sort of like maybe the English major in me. So because you could ask the question, what are you not accepting? I'm not accepting that. And so once I can point to that or describe that as something, I am differentiating it for myself. I'm not just saying, it may feel like I'm not accepting myself, but the work is to say, I'm not accepting this thing, this other piece that I don't want, as opposed to I'm just not accepting myself.
That's right.
That's an example.
Complicated.
Yeah,
I'm gonna throw in an example. So I've been struggling this weekend to do a piece of writing, and I think my writing process puts me right up against my perfectionism, and the voice inside myself that's basically just trying to discount every positive step I take forward, and also the paradox of I really don't like writing. it's really challenging for me, or it's like very stressful. It's a stressful process because of the things I just mentioned. But boy, do I love writing, or love reading writing. And I
you love to have written. That's what I've always said
yes,
about myself. I love to have written. It's
absolutely.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and what the progress that I was able to make this weekend, I actually finished a draft of something late last night, but it was the extent to which I was able to find a little success with that had entirely to do with not having an adversarial relationship with the struggle that I was having. And because that's a compounding factor too, is like when I'm struggling to write, I feel shame about that, because like, well, I have this gift, I have the time to be able to sit down and to express myself creatively. And so why am I not finding that joy? Why am I not, it's not even just the initial struggle of putting the correct sequence of words together. It's like, why then am I just not able to? Anyway, I just thought I'd speak a little bit to kind of like how I identified with that process you guys are talking about.
Well, was taught as a kid, as in college, that when we're trying to get clear on something, examples are the way to do that, Patrick. So I really appreciate, because we can talk concepts over and over and over.
Was that kind of it though? Was that like a little bit?
No, that is it. Let me give you another example that I remember. Nathaniel, I think he did write about it in the book, but he also talked about it in therapy groups. He and his wife were, one evening they were, going to bed, laying in bed, and his wife was interested in making love that night, and Nathaniel wasn't in the mood, right? He just wasn't feeling it, right? So he could have just gone with that and stopped at that point, and that would have been it. Or if he was somebody who had lots of judgments and criticalness toward his sexuality and stuff, he could have gone into that mode with regard to it. But instead, he just started talking about how much he wasn't in the mood, right? And how the idea just wasn't appealing to him. And within a few minutes, he was starting to feel very sexually attracted to her again. And that's an example to me that's just really clear and simple about the power of self-acceptance and the kind of therapy that Allen has practiced for decades, and that I have also done a lot of work with over the decades, Gestalt therapy. It's a fundamental theoretical aspect of Gestalt therapy that we change by embracing what is going on with us. We change by internally acknowledging and experiencing it. And then it can help a lot to also verbalize it or write about it or connect to another person about in that description of what's going on with us. It's ownership of what we are experiencing that often is the key piece of change. And change will happen of its own accord a lot of the time if we just take clearer and deeper ownership of whatever it is we are feeling. And it's a very powerful principle of change.
Well, it's an organic process. What we're doing is we're not blocking the process. And one of the things that you just also gave an example of is the power of communication. I remember being at on-site with Sharon and Joe Cruz back when it was up in South Dakota. It's like, and I remember going through their coupleship program with my wife, and it's like one of the things they would repeat frequently from their coupleship process was, emotional intercourse precedes sexual intercourse. And it's like, it's like, it was amazing to me at times where they would say, no, talk about your feelings. And I mean, these guys were just interrupting me constantly. No, that's not a feeling. Say about the feeling, talk about the feeling. And I would go through this process and actually end up having this quite interrupted conversation about my feelings to get some. And then I'd be sitting at the meal next time in the dining hall, and I'd just look at Dee Dee and I would feel just so close to her. It wasn't a 1-2, here's the instructions of how to do it. It was just getting out of the way and letting Yeah, and communicating it, of course, is acceptance, right? I'm owning it.
Well, this shouldn't go unremarked. I mean, this will come as no surprise to you guys probably, but my understanding of these concepts for so long was completely the opposite. I'm going to deny, all these things and push it into the corner, and I'm not going to let acceptance in. And furthermore, I mean, I guess we're bringing the sexual component in here. Like, looking through the lens the complete other way, you know what I mean? Not through the expanding of emotional intimacy, right? But let me just ride on my judgments and kind of like, and you can, I mean, I had a lot of gas maybe 10 years ago, so I was able to do things wrong for a while and kind of stumble through it. But I'm glad I'm finally, coming into contact with a different way to look at some of these problems.
There's a lot of acceptance in what you just said, by the way, in terms of your history.
Let me relate this in some way to emotional sobriety, because I see, when we call it self-acceptance, like I think some of the examples you guys gave, it's more of an acceptance of what is, isn't it, than self-acceptance. And I think that there's a difference, right? Self-acceptance would be accepting. Maybe there's not, let me try to talk through this. Like accepting what is, like the example that you gave, Patrick. To me, that's an accepting what is. I'm struggling. I'm having a difficult time. I don't like doing this. Making that announcement is accepting what is true about where you're at right at that particular moment, right? Accepting that you're a perfectionist. Right? That's a part of you. And see, one of the things that I think is important when we say some of this stuff, because I think there's a danger of overgeneralizing or over-identifying ourselves with some of these self parts we have. If I say I'm a perfectionist, it means that there's no other part of me. If I say there's a part of me that's perfectionistic, then I keep myself in a better balance, because we talk about emotional sobriety about being balanced. That's one of the points I wanted to bring in. And the other point I wanted to bring in is that it's an honest relationship to the reality of the moment, right, that we're having. And so that alignment with reality and in some way an alignment with ourselves is such an important thing. And part of that alignment with ourselves is to be balanced. I am not just a perfectionist. I am not just my addiction. I am alcoholic. I'm a recovering alcoholic and an addict, but that's just a part of who I am. It's not all of who I am, or else recovery wouldn't be possible.
No, I think the way you, for me, I just think the way you say that it works better in some ways, because it actually makes it less personal. It's like, that we're not, it's not, because what we're talking about are we're talking about concepts and principles that apply to us all. And the idea is, and I like you, Alan, I really love the part where, and I've gotten that from Roger a lot too, the idea that it's acceptance of what is, not just acceptance of me. Because, and I mean, hell, almost anything we can do to get away from the over focus on me that we've spent so many years doing is probably useful to us, and not in a negative way, but just the idea of understanding we're part of a whole, and that whatever, that is, and you're right. Identification with one part, I have eating disorder. I'm an eating disorder. No, you're not, you have a relationship with that,
Yeah, the way I think of it, you guys, is that self-acceptance is simply a subclass to me of acceptance of acceptance of what is. That's all. It's just, but I couldn't agree with you more. And you know how strongly I feel about that from the Thursday night workshops, Thom, that too much self-focus. In fact, as we've talked about self-esteem a lot, the two big pieces we've added to that from my perspective, compared to Branden's writings, is we've added the idea of humility-based self-esteem, but we've also added the idea of relationship-based self-esteem, which is very different
And both of which
include
are very essential to emotional sobriety. Absolutely.
well, that's the transition I was also wanting to make, because if we talk about emotional sobriety as you know, Bill Wilson introduced it in the 1950s in that letter to in the Grapevine, in terms of, you know, excessive emotional dependency and unrealistic expectations then becoming demands. That's where the notion of self-esteem and self-acceptance is so intertwined. Any progress we make in our level of self-esteem and self-acceptance is progress that we are making, from my point of view, with our emotional sobriety. Because Branden writes a lot, he uses the term individuation rather than differentiation, but he uses it, I believe, in the same way, especially in his book, Honoring the Self. But much as you do, Allen, he talks about it as a process of, you know, we're born in a completely dependent state. And in a way, our development is through our entire developmental process, in some ways through our entire life, not just through childhood and adolescence, is toward autonomy, increased autonomy, right? But it's autonomy in context. It's autonomy in connection. It's autonomy in relationship to other people. And Allen and I were just talking about this yesterday, that it's important not to get too black and white, I think, about these ideas, all of them: self-esteem, self-acceptance, emotional dependency, expectations. To me, they're all on a continuum, all of them. And as I was saying to Allen yesterday, a hyper concern with emotional dependency, if I'm already a person who in the process of my development as a kid and as an adolescent has learned to shut out other people from my life, has learned to defend myself deeply from other people, I'm going to jump on the idea of, oh, emotional dependency is a really bad thing, right? We can't have too much emotional dependency. I can't let myself be too impacted by how other people treat me or what they say to me, because then I'm having excessive emotional dependency. It's just, it fits perfectly with my constellation of coping mechanisms already, with the way that I've already walled myself up and isolated myself from other people. If, on the other hand, I'm a person who has never developed a solid sense of self, right? And that certainly applies to me, and I believe to most of us in a lot of ways. And I really am far too influenced in exactly the way Bill Wilson talked about it. I'm constantly looking to others for validation. I'm constantly looking to others for approval, or I'm constantly trying to control others by, quote, caretaking them in certain ways that aren't really that helpful, right? But make me feel good and in control. Then the message about focusing more on strengthening my sense of self and my differentiation from others is an incredibly needed message for me to hear, and gives me a path for focus. So that's what I mean about not getting too black and white about these ideas, because it depends on how I am as an individual. That's why I talk a lot about what's important is for me to know myself. And that's not easy, as you guys know. We all have huge blind spots, no matter how much therapy we've done, no matter how it reduces our blind spots. But I think it's real important to be humble about how many we still have remaining and how deep they go, no matter how much spiritual work and program or therapy we've done on ourselves. So I just wanted to put those pieces in, but I turn what do you guys want to say about the connection between self-esteem and emotional sobriety?
I want to pan out just a tad more even, and just say, you remind me of what I frequently tell people about any metaphor we're using in therapy, that basically I say, the good news is, whether it be should monster in your head or addiction or whatever, you say, the good news is it's a metaphor. It belongs to us, and we can change it any way we want to. It's like it's not an actual object. It's not an actual objective reality. And and this comes from my experience as being the English major therapist who didn't mean to be a therapist but was an English major, is what you're describing is the same relationship with language. It's like don't latch on to language so tightly, because and I see that often when I'm working with couples or any kind of relational stuff, is a lot of times people are not so much disagreeing as they are defining their terms differently. And I mean, I've pointed out so through the years so many times we're to say to a couple, you guys aren't really disagreeing. And they'll look at me like I'm crazy, but I can then show them basically if we translate their language, they're closer to agreement than they think they are.
Your self-esteem means something different today than it did, 10, 20 years ago. What are some of the new factors that you've been identifying?
Well, the two that I mentioned a few minutes ago, Patrick, are the two most important ones, because again, Branden makes very clear in his writings that arrogance and self-importance and boastfulness and trying to put others down in order to make myself look better, those don't indicate genuine self-esteem. They indicate a deficiency of self-esteem. They are compensatory in nature, right? To help me boost my ego with a capital E. But Branden does not explicitly write about humility much at all. In fact, I'm not sure he writes about it at all. He implies it in a lot of ways, but not explicitly. He writes about spirituality, especially later in his career, as self-esteem as a spiritual process, the raising of our self-esteem, which I appreciate a lot, because he wasn't a religion-oriented guy at all. He felt, because his focus was on rationality and on the mind so much, right? And so for me, it's the humility piece that has had the biggest influence on me in trying to recognize all those areas of my life where I lack that attribute, and the relationship piece. And I still spend far more time alone, especially since COVID, but in general in my life, I have a pretty introverted, pretty introspective part of my nature. In some ways, I tell people COVID has not been great for me, because it's led me toward parts of myself that are already pretty pronounced and pretty strong in my personality, which is I can spend tremendous amounts of time alone and be perfectly fine, right? Whether it's reading or watching TV or just writing or whatever it is. So those are the two pieces, though, because my relationships do mean an incredible amount to me. They have with you guys and with so many other people, including my family, clearly.
But is that something you had? That's something you had to learn, or that didn't come to you naturally?
No, relationships come to me naturally, but becoming more authentic in my relationships is very much something I've needed to learn. And again, that authenticity does not always mean, letting my experience in the moment or my feeling of the moment possess me and direct and control my behavior choices or my words. It doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean, developing an ability to increase my level of authenticity while also being sensitive to the needs of those around me. And I add hopefully to that in all caps, right? So Allen, you often talk about it as again, with your concept of balance. It's so important to think of these ideas in terms of balance. You talk about the importance of being able to act for ourselves without being selfish, and to act for others without being selfless. And I love that way. I don't know where you found that of putting it, because it addresses a nuance about we can take good care of ourselves, and that's not selfishness in the way that we ordinarily use the term, because normally it has quite a negative connotation. But it's a nice way of speaking to that. And we can be focused on others and being sensitive to and empathic toward them and concerned for them without abandoning ourselves. And so I love that way that you put it, Al. It's about balance.
Yes, yes. No, it really is, man. It seems that it keeps coming back to that, doesn't it? And that idea about acting for self without being selfish and acting for others without being selfless is really a great idea in terms of the balance that we're looking for.
Well, it's one of the things that I talked about words earlier. Words guide us, if we're clear on our definitions. And actually what came to my mind, Patrick, when you said, was different, I show you how nutshell oriented I am, is that we actually sell it, I think, online as a t-shirt. It's 3 words that I began using many years ago as just the 3 words that I use to start my day, which are gratitude, humility, and kindness. And it's, I need things very simple, and it's the idea, and the idea, the meditation of that is simply that any day that includes within my own being those 3 things, gratitude, humility, and kindness, is likely to be a good day. And I just put it in there like it's a habit, like brushing my teeth. As a matter of fact, I even have that particular meditation. I'm not sitting and meditating. I say those words when I'm letting the ducks out of their pen where they sleep at night. And that's so good morning to the ducks, and gratitude, humility, and kindness. And it's like, and those 3 are really, I mean, those 3 things changed my life. I mean, it's like, and I think, so I think the difference for me years ago, Patrick, was I was so fucking heady about all this stuff. It was a lot of wonderful concepts. I mean, I can read back and stuff that I thought about and read about. I don't disagree with anything I was saying or writing. It was, but it's like, it feels like these days it's deeper, which I think is hopefully how it should be as we get older.
Yeah. If one of those 3 words is kind of my mantra through my day, and again, nowhere near perfect in my practice of this, but kindness or compassion, as I think of it, is that's what it is. But all 3, I mean, we've all been through health issues recently, Allen, you and Thom and I, at least, and gratitude is a big piece of how I try to look at those. I try to keep focus on, and even in illness, I have found a lot of things to be grateful for. But, gratitude, humility, and self-esteem are 3 incredible, not just ideas and not just principles, but practices, right? Yes. Practices to embody through my day. Because I still get pissed off by all kinds of stuff that I wish I didn't get pissed off by, whether it's a driver cutting me off on the street or much more serious things than that. But as my acceptance that it's okay for me to feel whatever the heck I feel has increased, or even to think whatever I think, but it's not okay for me to do whatever I might want to do. And that I don't need to hate myself for it as a person, but behavior is in a different class for me. But as you mentioned, gratitude, humility, and kindness, I talk about 3 things that help my self-esteem, right? When I align myself with those 3 practices each day, my self-esteem is really strong. And I also talk about it in the ways Branden does, that it's the integration of self-respect or a sense of self-worth, and what he calls self-efficacy, which is just self-confidence, right? A sense that I'm able to deal with life reasonably effectively, and that my mind is up to that task. That's what he means by self-efficacy, or just self-confidence is another term that he uses for it. Right. But in a more personal way, like you say, self-respect, I also think about a lot, and you talk about that a lot, Thom, in terms of like, if I'm in a tough point, in conflict, trying to decide, it's like, well, looking back on it, what decision am I going to respect myself the most for making in this situation is another very helpful guideline. But I really appreciate you bringing in gratitude, humility, and kindness, man. Because
you bring back the ultimate punctuation, I think, for all of our conversations, which is practice. You know, I don't think we can say that often enough. I think we say it a lot, and we can say it more and be fine. And that's one of the main differences between where I was and where I am today, Patrick, is I understand concepts are useless and even dangerous, because I used to read concepts, you know, and think, oh, now that I understand this, I'm better, I'm good, and of course that was not the case. That was really that was arrogance. But what it didn't mean for it to be, but it was. Unless I take a concept, if a concept makes sense to me and I want to use it, I have to translate that to practice if it's going to change anything in my world.
I'm so resistant to practice, but the extent to which I've been able to cobble one together has meant a huge difference to the outcome.
Well, I've seen you do a lot of it, by the way.
It's invisible to me, I guess, a lot of the time.
Well, I'll try to point it out when I see it.
Well, I'm sure glad we did this.
Me too. Thank you for the invitation, you guys, very much so.
Hey, Roger, I hope you're enjoying yourself. We really enjoy having you on. So whenever we're lucky enough to have you, I'm just so grateful.
That means a lot to me, Patrick. It really does. Because I love all three of you guys. I've known Allen the longest, of course, since 1979. And so I know Allen at a much deeper level, and he knows me at a much deeper level. But I've come to love you, Thom, and you as well, Patrick, and the time I've gotten to know you guys. So it means a lot to me to have the invitation extended for me to participate in this. And it just embodies what I think about now in terms of self-esteem and emotional sobriety. It's connection. So much of it is about connection.
Before we wrap it up, there's one thing that's still on my mind. You said there were two components, really three components to self-acceptance.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of them. What was the second one, Rob?
Well, I tried to mention two, Al, but I probably didn't do it clearly. Branden talks about three. One is a fundamental orientation, which is almost existential in terms of how I think of that word. Am I fundamentally for myself or against myself in my life? Am I against me or am I for me? Right? As a person at a really deep, unconscious and also often highly conscious level or subconscious level. The second level is, am I able to be aware enough? And we haven't talked about the importance of living consciously, which is, to me, really the core, even more than self-acceptance, of his orientation towards self-esteem. The choice to try to know rather than not know, see rather than not see, understand rather than block out. That's part of what he means by living more and more consciously. But the second level is, am I willing to live consciously with regard to my experience, whether I like it or not, whether I feel good about it or not? Am I willing to face what I'd rather not face about myself? Am I willing to talk about what I'd rather not talk about myself? Then the third level is the most commonly understood level, which is, I'm going to learn to be more loving toward myself in a general way in my life. I'm going to learn to be more of a good friend. As you put it, I'm going to learn to get, to stand for myself rather than to stand against myself. I'm going to get off my back and stand beside myself in support, as you put it, or something like that sometimes, Allen. That kind of self-friendliness is the third level that he talks about. So I hope
it's a spiritual program you just described.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think Branden thought of it that way as well.
Tend your life, tend your myth, cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories Bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee. Bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.